Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about classic WoW developer tweets, namely ones from the classic WoW lead, Brian Birmingham. Now, he's posted a tweet storm recently that's amounted to about 100 tweets at this point. And if you're a longtime classic follower, you know this is a very unusual pattern of communication. So I thought I would just gather all these tweets up, show them here, and do some light analysis. So let's get right into it. If you're familiar with any of my other content for dev tweets, I like to post an amalgam of many different developers and their different insights and perspectives of a game's development process. But for Classic WoW, sadly, we don't have that too much. Even the community manager doesn't really communicate much with the community. So it's quite sad to see. But since the announcement of Wrath of Lich King Classic about a week and a half ago, we have had quite the tweet flurry from one Brian Birmingham. And just to tell you a little about him, he has been with Blizzard since 2006 as a software engineer, and he is the classic lead. I don't know if he's the lead or a lead. I'm not quite sure what the full development hierarchy is with the classic team, but this is the one that is communicating this week. And from what I can tell, I have some optimism, I have some pessimism. There's some good bits here, there's some bad bits here, but I am left with a sense of hope that this communication might carry over at least a little bit into the future, and what we're getting might be a lot better than what we've been getting. At least that's my hope. So I'm going to try to keep this as optimistic as I can, while not being too softball on some of the more problematic areas that we're going to go over here. I will say I do believe Mr. Birmingham's heart is in the right place here. I think he really loves the game, the community, the company, and it's in pretty good hands in that regard. I will say there are philosophical perspective differences between him and I. From what I can gather, and you can judge for yourself with these responses, the classic WoW dev team is coming from a very casual perspective to the game. Someone that leads a very competitive guild and is very competitive myself, it's very hard to kind of draw a disconnect between what is being proposed here and what I would like to see the future direction of the game to be. But that's enough of that. Let's get right into the sections of the tweets that we're going to be reviewing. One of them is going to be about boost, some on communication with the community, duel spec, faction balance, faction race changes, LFD, and then kind of a rapid fire section where we take all the rest of the miscellaneous tweets, put them in one little category, and just get through them one after the other. We're going to start with a couple of tweets here that don't really fall into any specific section, but I did want to spend a little bit of extra time on. So this one right here is a question on the classic WoW armory. This is something that was in the game for Wrath of the Lich King and is inexplicably not there. I was expecting to get it sometime at the end of TBC, still nothing. What Brian has to say on this is that there will be no announcement on that forthcoming. In his unpopular opinion, he believes that it contributes to gatekeeping and it's not good for the game. As the lead, you can probably read this to say that it is not coming into the game. I mean, that's pretty disheartening to hear. It's a nice little feature. It feels like it. I personally don't believe it adds anything negative to the game, and only adds a positive, and it's something that was there in the past. Now, he does go on to say that the reason for this is he believes it's gatekeepy, that people can use it to get out of groups or to deny people from groups. But it really, I don't really see why that would be a factor when there's already gear checks, there's already logs that are asked to be linked. In Wrath of Lich King, there will be achievements that ask to be linked. There will be add-ons like gear score. There might be a more robust Raider IO gear score even this time around. So I'm not sure that's actually a good enough reason to not have a pretty key feature out of the game. So yeah, it sucks to see. And the even worse part of this was his follow-up on the gatekeeping is that he also doesn't like logs. And again, he's emphasizing that this is a personal opinion of his. That said, that disclaimer doesn't go too far when you are a very important figurehead lead of the game in which you are one of the cornerstone decision makers. So yes, in his personal opinion, this thing that is, for me, so integral to the competitive experience, and even so far to say I probably would not be playing this game, making content for this game, and putting as much time in if logs didn't exist, because it's a way to continue to push the envelope and try to perfect what you're doing and what your guild is doing beyond just the initial progression. As we all know, the current state of TBC and Wrath of the Lich King, progression isn't a big pool. It isn't something that keeps people content driven in between the patches. What keeps people there is iterating on their parses, iterating on their kill speed, and iterating on their group composition, and pushing into the next tier to do the same. It's just not how it was back in the day, where progression was the main pool, like it is in retail. It's a different game, and this seems out of touch in a way that is one of my more negative takeaways from this whole endeavor. And that's why I wanted to start here, just to kind of lay the groundwork in the perspective of kind of where I'm going to be coming from. But I think this is the hardest I'm going to be on Mr. Birmingham here tonight. And this last one, before we get into specific sections, is just kind of a macro question about things that Blizzard plans to address, such as they did with Seal of Blood and Drums. Brian talks about how he doesn't believe there's anything too problematic going on here that they need to consider, and to his credit, is open for suggestions. The big one here, and the number one in my mind, is obviously the human racial. They have announced, and we'll talk about this a little later, that they're not doing any faction changes. Pretty incredible little announcement there, especially considering this is a PvP trinket essentially on a racial. It's by far the best racial in the game. It by far caused the most faction transfers at any period in WoW's history, because this has allowed PvPers to essentially have a trinket slot that could be dedicated to a PvE trinket for damage, and that's just an incredible leg up on the competition. When we're looking at this, it's something like adding basically an additional piece of gear for the opponent that you're playing, and not just any piece of gear, next to a weapon, the most impactful slot on your character. So yeah, that's why this is one of the most busted racials in the game. It's completely imbalanced for PvP, and why you're going to see a lot of pushback without the faction changes. He goes on here to say that, you know, if the problem is the racial and not the faction change in this regard, then maybe it's time to kind of hone in on that racial and bring it in line, or maybe boost some other ones to bring them up to that point. I don't know how they're going to do that, or if they plan to do that. But yeah, that would be a good option. There are other reasons for the faction changes, as far as there not being any other balance changes that should be on the table. Some things that come to my mind. So for me, one of the main issues that could arise here is the problem with externals. So there are two main externals in the game that I'm thinking of right now: Unholy Frenzy and Tricks of the Trade, with doing Death Knight and Rogue respectively. And externals are just, I don't know, they're something that they add a bit of flavor to the game. They brought them back in Shadowlands because they were back in Classic, to see if people, you know, would vibe with that. And, you know, it was kind of cool until you saw it in practice, where the retail environment is just so messed up with parsing and speed kills and and whatever, depending on if you're a caster mostly right now, because PIs are just incredibly degenerate. Almost all the top parses for any of those classes, you'll see things on the board like 16 PIs in one encounter, just in crazy stuff, to kind of cheese these kills, and it doesn't really feel like you can ever compete with the top of the top. I mean, you can still push 99s and all that jazz, but if you're really trying to be the best of the best, it feels really bad that you have the option to just get cheesed out of any encounter. And TBC mages will tell you that innervates were so integral to that parsing environment that it felt bad, right? And you know, that this has the potential to be the same thing, but not just for mages, but for all melee, right? And even all damage dealers, right? You're going to have raid leaders tell you all 5 Unholy Frenzies are going to 1 Affliction Warlock. You're going to have Tricks of the Trades from rogues wanting to maybe trade with themselves to kind of get that damage buff up, but being told that they have to do it to someone else, like a Feral Druid or something, because it just does more damage. And while that's a cool little strategic element for raid leaders to employ, in reality, it feels bad for the classes that have that utility, that maybe they could be using it on themselves, or maybe being able to benefit in some way from it, but are unable to because it's just not optimal. And as we know, that's kind of what people are prone to do, is to do what is optimal. And optimal can sometimes be the bane of fun. And it's kind of up to the developers to kind of see if there's a heavy hand that could be had here. Some small tweaks that come to mind would be maybe the rogue would still get the external benefit of the threat, such as misdirect, but you know, the damage would then go to the rogue that used Tricks of the Trade. Little changes like this could go a long way to creating a less toxic environment. I know maybe people might not have the same opinion, and I'm happy to have conversations on this to see if this changes, but that's my number one concern about Wrath of the Lich King, is just externals getting out of control at the high end. And if there's something to be done for it now, I'd rather say my piece. That was a bit of a rant. Let's get right back into why you're here, which is the developer tweets. And we're going to be talking about boosts. This section we'll be talking about the store boost, in which you can boost your character level up by paying, and the boosting meta with the leveling environment with the mages and the paladins and all that such. So this first tweet here is going to be about a guy asking for removing boost from the game, and he's talking about the paid service. This is the perspective that Blizzard has, in which they want people to be brought into the game. I tend to agree with this. I'm not a super big anti-booster. You know, I want to be able to maybe call up my brother one day and say, hey man, I know like WoW totally passed you by, but this Wrath of the Lich King thing is going to be pretty cool. Why don't you come play with us? And leveling and teaching him through the entire leveling experience is honestly pretty archaic, and I'd rather them just be able to jump in and get right into the mix with us, if that's something that they choose to do. So, you know, I think that's better for the game, better for the health of the game. I don't think there's anything innate with boost that does a major disservice. This was another tweet on the same subject, though I thought the response here was pretty peculiar. He talked about how they can't put the genie back in the bottle. And this kind of makes it, he's kind of phrasing it like they think it is a mistake to have added it, but they're not explicitly saying that. If that is how they feel, you know, I feel like maybe you should just go ahead and come out with that. But yeah, I don't know. This is a weird response, because I feel I could use this same response here for many decisions that they're trying to make in the future in regards to faction change, LFD, race change, and all that. Can't put the genie back in the bottle, but that is exactly what they're doing on a lot of these subjects. All right, and this was a tweet about boosting in the mage boosting sense and the leveling sense. I believe this response, for context, was in response to LFD and the concerns that mage boosting would grow from it. This is something Brian is talking about here, about mage boosting, something that they're aware of. Obviously, we've saw the changes in Season of Mastery with the slow reductions and the immunity to CC that these mobs would eventually get. And he's saying it did seem to help. And that is the feedback that I've also seen from the Season of Mastery servers. You know, but that is one of the key reasons why low-level groups are such a problem to find and level through, is because it's such a ubiquitous experience. I've leveled characters through boosting, and almost everyone I know has. But I think the key thing that is getting hung up on here, and it really just seems like missing the forest for the trees, and what the actual problem is. Season of Mastery, it works because there's mage boosting pretty much only, but some of the heavy boosters here in TBC and going into Wrath are going to be prop paladins, and these changes do not affect prop paladins as much as they affect mages. So if you're going to be tight with this as the change going forward, it's got to be something else, or it's got to be more heavy-handed, because the Season of Mastery change isn't going to be enough to solve the problem that you're identifying here. That's just a fact. This one is talking about some of the problems with botting. This is adjacent to boosting, where it's really hard to find some nodes, some herbs, and there's a lot of farmers botting in dungeons and stuff. People have long been concerned about the fact that you could who BRD at any point in time and see 50 rogues in there with all these dumb names, all the same level, just obviously doing some botting with pickpocketing and chest farming. And you can see the same with boomkins on retail. You can see the same with mages in certain dungeons. And yeah, while things for some of these classes might work, like anti-kiting mechanics and bringing over some stuff for retail, I think he's missing a lot of the parts of the question here, such as node farming, herb farming, the aforementioned pickpocketing from the rogues. Obviously not a big deal now, but Yeah, none of these changes, anti-kiting mechanics, reducing and eliminating XP, none of this is relevant to the question being asked here. The reason that you can't ever go out and get a Terracone on Faralina as an herbalist has nothing to do with any of these Season of Mastery changes. It has everything to do with the bots. What's being asked here is the bot detection. It's been pretty abysmal. They talk about doing bots in waves and that they are looking at bots, but the problem is it continues to be an issue. And I don't have a solution for it. I just wanted to highlight it here. It's still an issue. It doesn't really seem like it's being addressed. I hope it is soon. I'm not saying that they're not doing anything in regards to botting, but whatever they're doing is not working. So I hope there are changes soon. This is one of the bigger questions coming out of here is about Duel Spec, whether they'll have it. We didn't get an answer on whether or not we weren't going to get it in TBC. It was a huge requested change, and nothing. Silence from Blizzard. They decided not to do it. I understand why completely. I would have liked to have it. They've made many changes for the quality of life between Classic and TBC. In TBC, they signaled that they may do something of the sort as far as moving away from the no changes philosophy of the previous X-Pack. But no, still didn't get it. But more to the point, we didn't really get communication. We can talk more about this in the communication section. But this is about Duel Spec, and they are allowing Duel Spec with some restrictions, is what he said, such as when you can switch it. This set off a little bit of a flurry. There was, in the next tweets you can see here, some concern about what this could mean, because people have been looking forward to Duel Spec for a long time. It is a big quality of life increase, and it has a lot of value to the game. It adds more tanks to the tank pool, healers to the healer pool. People that otherwise wouldn't do off rolls now can do so with ease. It takes away a big archaic barrier to entry for playing the game. And kind of the vagueness of what was said at first was with restrictions, that just sets off a lot of alarm bells. And here you can see that kind of not the best logic train for what the line is. It borders on a slippery slope fallacy of like, well, where do we end it? Well, it's clear that it should probably be ended where the line was in Wrath of the Lich King. Correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, you could not change your spec in arena, and you could not change your spec in combat. If I'm wrong on that, I'm wrong on that. But I mean, yeah, that's the line. When people say where's the line, well, that's it. I mean, it's pretty basic. Just the same way it was. If you feel like it's going to be exploited in a different way, address that as it comes. But I don't really foresee anything too degenerate there. And while I don't totally agree with the way this feedback is being levied, I do agree with kind of the sentiment here. Right. I mean, obviously, no restrictions is like not par for the course here, because obviously there was minor restrictions. People, again, are just concerned that you're going to go beyond the pale for what existed. All these things, these limits existed in the game. Now, mid-dungeon seems questionable. I'm not sure if you could do it mid-dungeon through the LFD finder in Wrath of the Lich King. That's not information I have offhand. If that's something they want to limit, I guess that would be fine, I guess, because you queue up for a specific role. But if you don't have LFD, I think that changes, right? In an LFD system, your healer leaves and another healer gets cycled in, they get ported into the dungeon, and you can go. In this world in which you're approaching Wrath of the Lich King without LFD, your healer leaves, and then you have to find a new one. Someone in your raid says, oh, I can respec because I have Duel Spec. My off spec is healer. Great, that's awesome. You filled that role. Maybe someone has a guildie they can bring in that's a damage dealer, but no, you've added this restriction mid-dungeon to change it. So I guess initially for this specific interaction, if you have LFD in the game, yeah, sure, limit maybe respecking mid-dungeon. If you don't have it in the game, well, that changes the calculus completely. So I think obviously some restrictions should be in the game. I think people are a little up in arms that they're concerned about how far you're going to go with it. In this tweet here, more dissent on the worry of the vagueness of the restrictions. Brian not really having it here as far as having a more nuanced conversation. So he ends it pretty quick. Just wanted to add this here quickly. Further to this, it seems that there was some nuance conversation later on, where they kind of talked about what some of these additional restrictions could be. So some fears might be a little founded here, because it seems like we're considering restrictions now, which sucks, to be frank. Once you kill a boss with a certain spec, it forces you into that spec until raid reset. Feels pretty bad. Feels super limiting. I don't see the value in this, you know. He agrees here, seems a little heavy-handed. But I just, the concern of people having specs that might do different things within the same tree, I don't really see why that's a big deal. Why, if you have like an AoE spec and you have a single target spec, why switching those between different encounters when you're trying to do different parsing strategies or speed kill boss strategies, why this would be something that's detrimental to the game. Further, he talks a little bit about hybrid specs and whether or not this would make them less viable. Restricting it around this just seems so wrong, because the players you're punishing are the players that are min-maxing, and the players that run hybrid specs, as pointed out by this posters, are not the players that are min-maxing. These are players that want to cover all their bases at once. I guess this dual spec allows you to do that system, but again, if you're not min-maxing, you know, using dual spec to try out different forms of the game is more ideal for that player. But if the culture of min-max is what you want to go for, being allowed to min-max through your dual spec tree just seems like the logical choice here. To play devil's advocate, I suppose you could say maybe someone might want to have an off-spec healer role, but they feel like because they're in a competitive guild, they're forced to have, you know, a more viable spec within their role. I could see that criticism a little bit, but I have no idea how you implement something like that doesn't completely affect the pure DPS classes, your mages, your rogues, your hunters, in a way that isn't completely negative. It just seems like creating a problem to solve another problem that's not as big. So I hope they don't do that. I hope they simply go with dual spec with the basic limitations that we're in at the time. If there, again, is something that comes up that is an issue, address it then and there, but please don't try to create problems where they don't currently exist. And here for the last of the dual spec section, it seems like we are coming around at the end here. The discussion ends for me on a more optimistic note, with them saying there are issues, but maybe just blowing everything up isn't the right answer. Maybe just leaving it alone in this regard is the best foot forward. I like the philosophy, not to just shut the door on any ideas, to think about things, but there is an element of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This is the number one feature that people have been looking forward to for a long time. So much so that they were willing to kind of shed some no changes philosophy and mentality for TBC just because it was that good and would make the game that much better. Making that feature a more limited implementation does not seem ideal. So I hope they do land on the leave it alone section of this. But you know, as long as they keep their feedback train rolling as they have in the past week and a half, this should be pretty easy consensus to get from the community, and I hope they make the right decision. For faction balance, we have a couple of tweets here. The first one we're going to start off here is about Winter Grasp. All servers have one faction, says this guy. Bit of an exaggeration, says Mr. Birmingham. Some of them are still pretty balanced. Oh man, it's hard to see. The question is about Winter Grasp, right? And then it kind of gets into a defensive little bit of a tangent here about, you know, not all servers are totally messed up. But it's a lot of them. You can go to any demographic site. Ironforge.pro is a good one. I am the victim of a server that was one of the highest population servers in the game in Harad with a full balance, and it was a great classic experience. And I saw the total abandonment of the server by the Alliance in Nax, and then followed shortly by the complete collapse of the server in at the beginning of BT and Hyjal, to where the once second biggest server in all the United States for Classic WoW is now completely dead and no one plays on it. Me and my guild had to spend many hundreds of dollars for every individual person just to move a bunch of characters over to another server just to keep playing the game in any form whatsoever. We lost many people that quit the game this way that we enjoyed playing with. The whole identity and culture that we had been building up over the last 2 years was completely for naught, and it was one of the worst experiences in the game. If there was ever a time for me to quit, it would be with all of those other people. And to kind of blow it off here, and again, that is not just my experience, that is the experience of many people on many servers, United States, EU, you name it. And just to see it kind of like dismissed here, and you'll see it again in later tweets dismissed, it just feels really bad. So that's all I have to say on that. I don't think this was the right implementation of the response for a simple wintergrass question. So, and we can move on to another tweet here in the same vein, talking about the same demographic data from ironforge.pro. The proof is in the pudding. You know, he can say that he can't really comment on the accuracy of this data. This data, for context, does pull from logs of the raiding population. It's, from what my experience on Harad, extremely accurate to the trajectory of the server. It's updated every couple of weeks. And this is the snapshot where many of the servers are dominated by one faction because that's the most ideal way to play the game at the moment for some players. And once one faction becomes the minority, it becomes very hard for that faction to play the game in a way that suits them. And so you have these mass migrations, you have these mass quits. And again, instead of actually seeing that this is a problem, addressing the problem, the defensiveness comes out and it focuses on the accuracy of the data, and then, you know, saying, well, look at this one server, Grobulus. I mean, it's doing pretty good. Yeah, that's the exception that proves the rule, and everyone kind of knows that. If in some point in Wrath of the Lich King's life cycle, Grobulus does go the way of many of these other servers, this is going to be an even worse look from this tweet. So not all the eggs I would put in that basket. This is a clear problem to many players. It hasn't been addressed in any meaningful way. And yeah, just incredibly disheartening to see more defensiveness and less actually tackling the solution to the issue. And here's a quick one about a solution that is being proposed. This would be merging servers to create a more balanced environment. Mr. Birmingham talks about some possible issues here, named collisions, which is a real one. I'm not quite sure how you solve that, but I hope there are discussions about getting over that hurdle, because I think that is the biggest one, and overpopulation, which I don't think is a big one. I don't think a Golmag or a Razor Gore merge would even come close to the population of a white main server, for example. So I'm not sure why that is the cause for concern there. Like I said, it's probably not an exhaustive list, but yeah, these are problems. These are impediments to a solution. But I personally, I've been seeing this for a year now, a year and a half, 2 years even. Well, these are the problems to the solution, but the problems right now exist and they need to be addressed. I hate the concept of being on a sinking ship, which is what a lot of these servers are, and seeing a lifeboat drift by and saying, well, I don't want to get in that lifeboat because, I mean, what if it has a hole in it? It could sink. That conversation does not matter when you are standing on a sinking ship. So Blizzard's got to do something, and I haven't seen it, so I hope I see it soon. Some more discussion on these problems here, talking about plans to deal with it. Offering free transfers to other servers was nice, a little bit of a band-aid, not the full-scale solution I'm hoping for, but yeah, I get it. If you offer it too aggressively, then the realm dies. But the problem is, you open it when a realm is ostensibly dead, so that doesn't really matter. When we transferred off from Herod to Fairlina, this was before the free transfers went off. The server was dead as a doornail, and everyone had already made plans to leave. The servers that we wanted to go to were the high pop servers, to where we knew that we weren't going to have to go through this again. We chose Fairlina because it had the highest population, had the lowest chance on Horde side in the United States to meet the same fate Herod did in Wrath of the Lich King. The servers that were selected in the free transfer, again, weeks after we transferred, were servers that you could not reasonably make the same confident move. You could be moving to a transfer to a server that had Herod's population just 1 month previous, that could be meeting the same fate soon. And it's just, even if those were up when we decided to move, we still would have picked Fairlina. We still would have had to pay all that money. I have no idea why that's seen as like the solution when which is frankly not. It isn't wrong that there is a certain way that people play games these days that is modern to the extent that this is something that happens, but the hand wave of the inevitability of it all just seems, it's just hard. It's just hard to wrap my head around as someone who wants to see the game thrive, and this being one of the major impediments for people being able to play games with their friends. The limited server transfers, and the lack of foresight when these servers are dying, it simply needs to be addressed. And again, I hope in a less hand-wavy fashion, as I've been seeing in many of these tweets here. Really tough to see. Really tough to see. I hate to see it. All right, this is another faction balance question, but again, Winter Grasp, and we actually get some discussion on Winter Grasp here. Obviously, this is a big problem. A lot of faction-dominated servers. We all know that in Winter Grasp, if you have a faction-dominant server, when you queue up for it, if there's like even one person that get this crazy raid boss buff, it's probably really cool for them, but they're never going to win anyway. So he's being honest here. The floor is open for suggestions. You know, that is a huge problem for them and what they want to do. Maybe he's saying the weaker faction has access to Vault of Archimon without winning it, which I think is a no-brainer. It's the weaker faction in a lot of these servers is never going to win. Just locking out the content from them is just, it's a complete no-go. Any person that's elitist on this is arguing in bad faith. Maybe for cost, he says. I even think that's superfluous. They're already having a really bad time in the modern iteration of this game on a dying faction of the server that they're on. I don't think a cost is warranted here. So this guy is talking about, you know, the stacking damage HP buff. It was fun to be super powerful, he says, teaming up. But again, that team never won historically in Winter Grasp. Maybe there is a solution where you actually make that powerful enough to win, but I could see that just being really awful for the main faction. And again, you're giving a really good experience to that maybe one or two people that are on that dying server, and a really, really bad experience for the majority of people. It reminds me a little bit of the and I don't play this game a ton, but there was an event in Fortnite where you could be Thanos if you got the gauntlet, and it was very, very cool for the player that got the gauntlet. They were Thanos, and they were just wiping the floor people. It was 1v14 or whatever, and it's cool. But the people that were fighting against Thanos obviously were having a much less fun time. But you know, that was a very small side event. It was smaller scale. It wasn't what you're going to see in Winter Grasp, which is a lot more than 1v14. And you could reasonably be Thanos yourself in the future. You, as a Horde player, let's say on a Horde-dominated server, fighting that one Alliance player, you will never, ever, ever get that experience. So the bad experience that you're feeling getting wiped the floor with by a buffed up version of this, and maybe this example, is going to feel bad, and it's going to feel even worse knowing that you don't ever get that other positive experience. I think there's just got to be full-scale changes to Winter Grasp writ large, more than just a tweaking of the knob here or there, if they want to actually make it engaging content. Otherwise, it's going to be just a footnote for trying to get into the PvE content, the Vault of Archimon. So, yeah, I don't have the solution here, but if they actually want Wintergrass to be engaging, it's going to have to be something different than what's being proposed at the moment. All right, let's get right into faction changes. So the barbershop was announced at the Wrath of the Lich King launch event, and you know, in it you could change your gender, you could change your character customization for a gold cost, and faction changes and race changes were an omission from this. And it was announced that they weren't going to be doing that. It seems here in this tweet right here that they are, I believe the context of this is talking about server balance, faction balance, and rather than making the problem worse, they feel like removing this feature might be a band-aid fix for it. Again, I don't think removing a feature that a lot of people have planned for the game is going to do a whole lot of good here. So I really hope they do make a different change for the faction balance, and I don't think this is going to have any tangible effect. And he says we're going to take a hard look at Wintergrass. Like I said before, it's going to have to be a really hard look if it's going to do anything. And this one was talking about faction imbalances in regards to racials and all of that. You know, and there are different reasons for this. Again, this is just another highlight of this specific problem. We can move on to another one here. So this one is asking for a little bit more detail on the no faction change topic. And I think this is the most prescient point to be noted here. Many players have started their tunes with the expectation that they would be able to change them, you know, when faction changes were actually in the game. And so this is one of the more out of touch responses that I've seen here. And again, full preface, I think his heart is totally in the right place. And he is being completely honest here. He is surprised that people would make characters with one race planning to change it later. When people made their classic characters, everyone, including the community and Blizzard, was on the no changes front. But we also knew when changes were coming to the game. We knew Wrath of the Lich King was going to have faction changes. And a lot of people were playing Classic with the expectation Wrath of the Lich King would come out. That is not a wrong expectation to have. It's proven by the fact that it happened. I knew that the resources that Blizzard was able to put into Classic and the output they were getting monetarily was going to be a no-brainer to get to the expansion that had their highest user base, over 10 million subs at its peak, again, for minimal resource allocation. Complete no-brainer. And so yes, people were making characters with the expectation, and you can even look at it on a smaller level. In Classic, you're saying, I want to be competitive. I want to be in a good guild. I want to be in a good guild with my friends. And to do that, I'm going to create my character with what I know is a good race, right? I'm going to make it a troll because berserking is really good for this class. I'm going to make it an orc because blood rage is a really good racial for this specific class. And that's what people did. And these racials change all throughout the history of Classic, TBC, and Wrath of the Lich King to where they're in completely different states in Wrath of the Lich King. So now maybe you're a Scarab Lord, maybe you have Corrupted Ashbringer, you have all this collectible gear and pets and a title, and you're working on achievements in Wrath, and the racial meta changes for what you do in PvE, or again, more impactfully, what you do in PvP. And the solution cannot be, oh, level up another warrior. If you want to min-max, level up another warrior, lose all your titles, lose all your gear, you know, drop some gold in G-bids and get that character raid ready, and that'll be your new character, and that's how we want you to be able to experience the height of the game. That just seems, again, completely out of touch, and something that can't be the reasonable conclusion here. This is something that needs a big look at. The problems that not having race changes, faction changes in would cause do not merit the solutions that they solve. So I'm going to take a pretty firm stance on that one. And this is one I really hope that they do go back to the drawing board on. Here's another good little Twitter feed here about people kind of illustrating their experiences on why they would want to faction change, to play with their friends, to have a different experience with different guilds and different communities. you know, a race change on why this character wanted to be maybe a dwarf priest in Classic for the Fear Wards, as everyone was talking about, and why maybe the massive change to stone form in PvP could have a great effect on that in Wrath of the Lich King. And so again, to his awesome credit here, Brian is being very receptive, hearing everything and letting everyone know that they're being heard. And hopefully as these anecdotes come in, you know, this could be a continuing change for an evolution for the team. Okay, the main event, looking for dungeon. So this first tweet here, you know, I really wanted to start with this one because this guy's talking about, you know, keeping and changing the good parts, discarding the bad parts, finding a middle path. And Brian is saying that's kind of exactly what we want to do here. They want to improve the tool and kind of cut back on some of the issues that they see. Now, some of the issues that they see here: automatic grouping, teleportation, cross-realm groups. I could see why you would think that is the issue. It is what it is. The key tenet here is that the initial rollout of saying the LFD tool would be gone was met with a lot of negative feedback, and you know they had to do some backpedaling. That, you know, it wasn't just that it was going, that there was going to be something else there, and he wanted to really reiterate that, you know, they are going to be working on it as best as possible, and we'll talk about some other solutions that they propose here in the tweets. Now, I will say there's been a lot of movement on this, and you know what, I know that there's a future tweet coming up that kind of touches on this, so I'm going to save this rant for that one specifically. I will say real quick, automatic grouping probably should be in if they want to have this solution here matter. Teleportation can be out probably. I would prefer it be in, but it can probably be out, and cross realm can be out too. I think that's a pretty fair assessment. This tweet's talking about the retail version of Group Finder for use for Mythic Plus. The pre-made Group Finder is exactly what Brian is responding to here, and he agrees that something closer to that would be good. They're looking to that for inspiration. I will note that there is Dungeon Finder in retail, and the reason Mythic Plus pre-made Group Finder is in the game is to have a more curated version with more gatekeeping involved. Because that content is harder, you need to be able to screen what classes you have, what gear they have. They have a very much more degenerate than gear score add-on called Raider IO, and yeah, that version of it is the most gatekeepy version in the game. I think it's good because I don't have a complete negative view on gatekeeping insofar as being able to curate a competitive group for yourself, but I think it really flies in the face of the philosophy that they're trying to flout earlier about being anti-gatekeeping with the armory, with logs, and these other facets, by having this feature, which is ostensibly going to end up being much more gatekeepy than anything that an automatic pre-made Dungeon Finder could be, or looking for dungeon automatic group queue could be. So I hope maybe they come to some sort of I guess reckoning with those two philosophies that are, to me, completely disconnected from each other. I'll go over this one quickly, but it's talking about kind of the effectiveness of the tool, and Mr. Birmingham is talking about how it can be more effective, you know, using the tools to passively list yourself as willing. In the current tool, maybe it's just not enough. And talking about the bulletin board mod, this is a key component that needs to be honed in on here. There's an add-on that does group finding right now, and it's very bare bones, but it's the most effective way. And the current group finder in the game, the current tool, is not used because people prefer this add-on. It muddies up the trade chats, and using this it feels archaic, it feels old, feels bad, but it's still the best way to get a group, and so you have to use it. So whatever system Blizzard comes in here, it's got to be better than the bulletin board, and I don't see a way that it will be better than the bulletin board mod without having some sort of automatic grouping feature. I think that's I think that's the limit, I think, for being able to use the tool over the add-on. So I hope maybe they come to that conclusion. Maybe they have a different solution I'm not thinking of. So in this one, the question is asking about player vote or compromise, talking about low-level dungeons and how hard it is to find groups for them, talking about maybe limitations with the RDF and maybe allowing them for lower-level dungeons, and Mr. Birmingham talking about how this is an issue. They're looking at all feedback on how they can fix it, what the problems are that have actually caused low-level grouping to be completely ignored. It is frankly multifaceted. It has to do with mage boosting. It has to do with the paid boost. It has to do with the culture of the game. It has to do with what is optimal, and it has to do with LDF coming or RDF coming out and not being in the game. Basically makes it a non-starter for being the solution that it would end up being. And this is another one about the low-level LFD experience and how it does solve the issue. I think I have to point out again, to his credit, soliciting more feedback and how they would do something. And this guy's talking about a possible solution with different satchels, creating different drops, maybe some heirlooms that have a higher chance to drop from dungeons and low-level dungeons. Just any little idea that can make the experience better, and they're listening. This probably isn't going to be the one they go with, but I do hope they do something. And it sounds like they're listening, and that there is going to be something there. So try to be optimistic about that. The biggest one here in that same vein is that this guy's saying maybe double the loot drops in lower dungeons, a little bit of harmless extra progression. Mr. Birmingham said honestly that might be the answer. This is one of the more positive tweets to the feedback of saying like this is maybe the closest to the implementation that they might have. Increased XP for dungeon quest might be enough of an incentive, but I just personally I'm not completely convinced that these things would be enough of an incentive for low-level players to group. Again, boosting is one of the biggest problems for this. If you have a better solution, as we saw with the LFG bulletin board, if you have a better solution in the game, that is what people are going to do. They're going to take the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance is oftentimes not fun. So managing where that path goes is the job of a developer, and I really hope they are able to isolate the problems so that the solution can be beneficial. I just want to do a quick interlude here on the LFD topic. From what I can gather from the replies, Blizzard they were pretty dead set on doing the removal of Wrath of the Lich King, the looking for Dungeon Finder in Wrath of the Lich King as early as Classic. And I was too, my friend group, and a lot of you watching were super against it. We thought maybe, this is maybe the start of the end for Blizzard as far as what our enjoyment of the game came from. Socialization kind of went out of the window because of this, and yada, 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 other. And, as we actually played through Classic and TBC, that didn't seem to be the case. The gamers had changed without it. We are living in a world in which, there are GKPs, there are logs, there's parsing, there's more gatekeeping than ever. Getting into a group is harder than it had ever been back in the day. And this was a tool that actually helps that. And a lot of people's minds changed over the course of playing the game. And so what Blizzard thought was a slam dunk, like everyone's going to agree with this is going to be a popular ideal. When they announced it, it wasn't so. And in the replies, you've seen that they've even said that they were surprised by the kind of the pushback that they're getting. And I'm personally surprised that I've changed so much over the last few years on this topic. All I can say is I hope that they take the feedback to heart, and there can be some positive changes from this. I'm not going to die on the LFD hill. It's not even in my top 3 most important things that need to be looked at for Wrath of the Lich King, but I am patently pro LFD, and I hope they do make some good changes with it. First, we'll start off with some praise. This poster is talking about how awesome it is to see the feedback from one of the developers. This was a big day for them and for the announcement, and it was kind of the impetus for it. But barring that alone, I have to agree with this poster here. The Twitter today alone, that's April 19th, of the day of the announcement, more communication and answers than 3 years of Classic Blue Post. And that's absolutely right. So hopefully we get more of this. Again, he's kind of talking here about how maybe you should go post more on the forums, which would be cool. I would like to see more cross-pollination on the communication between these different sites, whether that be Twitter, the official WoW forums, or even the Classic subreddit. In some of my favorite games, the developers are heavily communicative in the Reddits, right? If you go to the Destiny the Game Reddit, you will see a ton of Destiny developers talking with the community about possible solutions to problems or announcing things there. Something that you would never see in Classic WoW. And I know they don't have the same PR resources that some of these other larger games have, but it really shows that, people are really receptive to this type of communication and want more of it. Now that the praise is over, there are still some concerning issues with communication. Again, it's a nice week, but it's been really bad for the entirety of Classic. I'm sorry to say, it has been pretty abysmal when you compare it to any number game, really. And right here, we're hitting at the crux of the problem. I know this flurry of level of tweets can't be kept up, especially from someone so busy. And while I do appreciate it, it really shouldn't all be on this one developer's shoulders, right? This game has a community manager, and frankly, I don't hear from them. And when I do hear from them, it's stuff like the PTR is going up with no notice, and I can't plan for it as a guild, and I'm already a little incensed in that. Or the PTR has just went down. I'm sorry, guys, if you were planning on doing it tomorrow, or if you had made plans for it still being up, or you had made plans on the precedent. And I'm being very judicious with the I'm sorry, because they don't apologize. It's really just matter-of-fact news post about happenings and not really any community management, right? You're not having this full-scale interaction with the community like we're seeing here. And as much as I appreciate it, stuff like it takes time to make the game too, it is dismissive. And it really should be the job of the person whose job is to manage the community. So I hope maybe that's something that's looked at. Obviously, you can't throw them under the bus here, but this one is talking very interestingly about the poll system in some other games, RuneScape most notably, in which the community is polled and changes go through. I'm not totally dead set on this as a solution, though I have heard from all my friends that play RuneScape that this is a pretty positive thing from the community. They're kind of talking to it. An in-game polling solution could be cool, is what he says here. I really do like how the Warcraft log site and Kira do things. They do poll the community quite often to see what they want. They don't necessarily go with what the community wants, but it is a really good way to understand where the community's head's at without assuming, right? And you can get a lot of data that way, especially in official capacity. And my kind of feeling on what the player base feels on something could be completely wrong to this data. And as long as the data is represented accurately, I'm going to be happy with the solution that comes out generally. Don't hold me to that, but I think something has to give, something has to change with the communication, and I think this could be a really good start. If they don't go with this solution, they go with another one, that's fine, as long as something is in place. While I agree that the polling factor is important to take into account, and especially in this LFD type topic here, there's something that Brian is hitting on really poignantly here, in that there are biases in polls, right? You can't just hand wave it completely and say these polls are totally invalid, but you have to understand how the question is phrased and when it is being asked. I'm a big connoisseur of 538 around the political season, and that and political polling itself, and how they kind of do a big aggregate of all polls, grade them based on these different metrics, and kind of allow you to see what the grading on is for these polls, to see if they're more valuable to your aggregate data. And so maybe kind of looking at the underlying metrics on how this works on a fundamental data analysis level is something that Blizzard could do. Seems like a lot of work, seems like a more dedicated position. He is right in that there is bias in polls, and you can't take it, you have to take it with a grain of salt in some environments. This is another issue with polling here, in that it is treating as a binary where there is, and clearly Blizzard wants to go with the middle path, and the middle path isn't really illustrated here. That said, if there is a strong majority one way over the other, your previous unanimous decision may need to be reevaluated. All right, and we are finally at the tail end of things here. This is the rapid fire section where I will do light analysis on miscellaneous tweets that don't really belong in any of the previous sections. So without further ado, the first one is about the coding in the game. This one is about the changes that Classic has occurred over time out of the modern client, and how they control different build flags and what they can do with the user interface settings. And so this is a really cool kind of what are they actually talking about here. You know, Dragonflight is announcing UI changes to the game. If the way that they're parsing the files through Classic allows them to institute some of these user interface changes into the game, maybe at an optional level, that could be pretty cool. That could be a pretty nice quality of life change. Maybe don't make it mandatory for the people that want that authentic Classic experience, but having more features in the user interface because they have access to it just seems like a win to me. So, and maybe I'm not understanding all the nuances and the jargon here completely, but I do hope we get something cool out of it. And this is a question on fresh Wrath of the Lich King servers. No announcements to be had, but Brian did talk about how you know, this is feedback they heard in Burning Crusade. Obviously, we didn't get it in Burning Crusade. He's saying it's not a slam dunk. It is something that could happen. They'll continue to talk about it. Obviously, they would have to restrict transfers to these servers. It would totally ruin the integrity of it if you could go GDKP on another server, come to this fresh server. The benefits of a fresh server are that the economy is basically reset and not totally inflated like it has been for the last several years with GDKPs boosting and the like. It's kind of a fresh little environment. How you're going to be doing boosts with it obviously is something to work out. I don't have any answers here. It's not personally something I'm doing, but I don't really see the harm in having it done, as long as you can't transfer to those servers, but maybe you can transfer off of them. I don't see how transferring off of them would have any negative experiences. This is a question about glyphs here, talking about what version of glyphs we're getting. Obviously, this has big balance changes. I could see them doing something like, you know, tiered content, as we saw with the badge vendors in TBC, where changes happened over time. But then again, some of these glyph changes were just quality of life and generally felt better. So I would be also fine with just having the final version of glyphs as well. Again, Brian said they haven't decided on what they're going to do yet. So yeah, it's being thought about at least, and we at least have some you know, information here. This is another one on the UI topic. This is a little bit different from the nitty-gritty coding stuff they had earlier, but it's in the same vein. There are UI improvements to Dragonflight, and they are not philosophically opposed to having them in the game, which is interesting. So, you know, obviously it wouldn't be the default because it is Classic and you want to have that Classic experience, but having the ability to modify your UI and anything that is going to be more akin to having that modded experience as a part of the default environment is welcome by me. There's a question about name changes. This is the first confirmation we have that name changes are being added. I believe name changes were in the game in TBC, and we have not seen them yet. No timeline yet. Hopefully they have it soon. A cooldown similar to realm transfers to avoid people abusing it. It's totally fine. I thought that was already in the game, but maybe it isn't. But yeah, I'm happy to see name changes in the game. I hope they implement something to do with being able to request a name change and getting a name for a previously inactive character for a certain period of time. A character that's been inactive for multiple years, maybe a character that's never even been into TBC, would be a good change. I tried to get Clap 2 weeks before the servers came up on the name res. I logged in the minute of, was not able to get it. And the person that got my name on one of the largest servers never touched the character, never had any logs, never had any aspirations to play it. The name that I wanted is just sitting there being not used. So in retail, this is something that is in the game for you to be able to access those names that are inactive with that feature. So hopefully that comes with it. I again only see the benefits. What are we going to do after Wrath? It's a big question. This poster is asking one of them. Obviously, they're not going to say anything. He's really on his feedback here as far as what he's wanting to solicit is saying there are no limits. Just basically tell us what you want. We heard this in the Ian Hazzikostas interview with Asmongold about what they want to do with the future of the game, and basically it was the same kind of line there, which is, what do you want? We want to hear what you guys want. There's anything from skip kata, go mop, no, totally do kata was awful. I'm sure they're hearing all of this. I'm not sure I completely buy that they don't have a plan. This is a multi-billion-dollar company, and this is a huge kind of money-making endeavor for them. I really don't envision a world in which they are a year and a half out from having to make this decision and not having kind of a couple of plans in place. Hopefully they share with us soon. Hopefully they take some feedback. But yeah, there's much more to talk about here. It's a pretty basic question on how the arena is going to work in the post S4 environment. Obviously there's not going to be a season 5 or an intermediary season. There's no gear there. I don't really have any strong opinions on this. He's saying, don't have it nailed down, but maybe just skirmishes. I don't really see this being kind of an important deal, but it was a question about PvP that did get asked and answered to some extent. So I wanted to add it in here. Just some confirmation that there will be no news in this current week about Season of Mastery. Anything that's going to be posted is official. AQ updates are being kind of plugged into the game as we speak. And there's not much more on the Season of Mastery front, whether they're going to do TBC Season of Mastery or if they're going to maybe have something different this time around. So this one is about stat tracking for achievements for Wrath Lich King that is coming out. And there's confirmation that no, you have not been getting your stats tracked. There might be a little bit of tracking. I imagine this is on stuff like achievements related to owning items and having them in your bag. These would be pretty easy things to parse and pull up. But as far as how many mobs did you kill on this day, they don't have any of that data. So just prepare for that when you're going in Wrath Lich King if you're a big achievement guy. Will we be able to turn in tier 6 tokens for Season 3 armor pieces once Season 4 starts? This is something that was in the game for the previous tier. It's being discussed now, and it's a hard maybe. I don't see why this wouldn't be in the game. Precedent is already in. People have already been preparing like it would be. There's, again, not a lot of negatives. It allows the PvP population to kind of catch up and that population to be more full. So, I hope they do this. I think it's a good change. This one is about TBC era servers. They have said that they are not doing TBC era servers like they did in Classic. No strong opinions on this. This guy obviously has a strong one. I was for this in Classic. I thought it was kind of cool. Obviously, it turned out that no one really played it. Maybe there was one guild doing something every once in a while. It was really kind of a glorified trophy case. If it came out again, I'd probably pay the nominal fee to have that glorified trophy case copy character in there for posterity. But yeah, if it's not really worth it for them server cost wise, I wouldn't really put much development time into it. I think there's much more important things to address. This one is a transfer question about, being able to go from PvE to PvP. He's seen the question a lot. He says doesn't have an answer today. He has seen the request. I don't. I'm not on a PvE server. I'm on a PvP server where I can transfer anywhere, and that's great. This limitation, PvE to PvP, I couldn't imagine being stuck on a PvE server that was dying, and maybe a lot of PvE servers are dying for that same reason, and not being able to go to, the PvP server where, all the highest competitors are playing, and I have to maybe re-level a character, lose my titles, lose my gear. That would feel pretty bad. This seems like kind of a no-brainer. Just do it. Just allow it. I don't know if there's a technical limitation here. But I hope they get it solved, because this would be, really feel empathy for the people stuck on those PvE realms that don't have this option. Just give it to them. This one's about transferring your character from one account to another. This is something that's been in retail. This is a feature that is gone. He's talking about how this could be used to circumvent the one boost per account that they have as a limit in the game. Again, maybe removing a pretty key feature for this boost feature might not be the best math here. If you do think that boost outweighed not having this feature in the game, what this poster is suggesting is flagging a character as boosted. This is the boosted character, and allow that from being transferred would probably be a good solution here, allowing the ability to transfer characters between different accounts that weren't boosted. I mean, that seems like a good change. I don't know what the technical limitations again are behind that, but I feel like that would solve some problems. This one is about Xmog in Wrath. The official answer is no, there will be no transmog in Wrath, but here are Mr. Birmingham's personal thoughts on the system. Collection systems are cool, and the transmog is just a little bit weird in this environment, and it's kind of a dividing factor. He's soliciting again more feedback. Personally, I really do like the transmog system, but as far as keeping some purity of the Wrath experience, I think that not having transmog is the way to go for Wrath of the Lich King. Wow. Okay, we're at the end of it. That was quite the long video. That was quite the long filming session. There's a lot of things I'm going to be changing about this format going forward. If you watched it to this way, if you watched it to this far in the video, I commend you. That's awesome, because this was kind of a mess as far as formatting. There were a lot of tweets to get through. I wanted to add, and I did add almost every single tweet that was posted in the replies for the last week and a half, as I don't think we're going to be getting much more. I posted my own tweet asking a question just last night, and I thought it was a good one. I thought it was asking kind of a key question about something that I really wanted to know for the next couple of weeks here, because I need to plan. I've got my brother's graduation, Memorial Day's coming up. I know a lot of people have plans, and this is a pretty key component to planning around that. And about a couple hours later,
6.5 hours later,
this was the response. So you can't win them all. I don't believe we'll be seeing this level of communication going forward in the future. Obviously, this is not something that can be maintained, but yeah, it was fun to kind of wrap it up while we could. The video is already long, so I'm gonna try to wrap it up here. Again, thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Yeah, I really appreciate your time, and have a great day. Oh man, that was terrible.